right now we're going to turn our attention to Lansing and stay-at-home orders and more with my guest this hour, a Republican state senator from Frankenmuth, Ken Horn, who joins me by phone. Hi, Ken. Welcome back to the show.
Well, it's good to be back with you, Tom.
Although I don't, have we done conversations by phone before? You usually
we did right after. Our last one was right after the state address.
Okay.
This year. Yeah.
I was trying to remember because of all the people I have on the show, you're more likely to want to go, come down and come to the studio, which I closed back in January. It was kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
I had decided to do the show from home, and then now everybody's doing it.
Yeah, you're a trendsetter.
I guess, although that's not the reason everybody's doing it. I had a guest on the show yesterday from the group that organized the the traffic jam they called Operation Gridlock yesterday in Lansing to protest the strictness of the stay-at-home orders issued by Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and interestingly, it made the national news. Michigan has some of the most stringent guidelines through this COVID-19 pandemic of any of the states in the country, but we've also got a lot of cases compared to other states. I had just a brief chit-chat with you online, and you were telling me about a bipartisan group that you've been working with called Safe Behaviors for Safe Workspaces. What is that? That phrase? Is it a committee? Is it a group? Is it the name of the project?
It is the name of our work group. And if you flip over, Tom, to my Facebook page, if you got a computer right in front of you, you'll see that I just posted moments ago a website that leads you to a survey that our committee is putting together, and you'll see the title of it. It is a bipartisan work group. There's 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats on it. I also chair the state's Economic and Small Business Development Committee. And so our focus is opening businesses in a safe manner. So if you think about working inside the governor's executive orders, I do agree that they're a little stricter than they need to be, but as they are in place as a stay-at-home order, and our work group is tasked with the responsibility of finding a way to create safe workspaces, so that you're at home, you travel to a safe workspace, and then back home again. And we believe that there are ways that we can make a workplace as safe as home, and get our economy kickstarted again.
The group that protested in Lansing yesterday were concerned that some of the restrictions are a little too heavy. A lot of people have been complaining about not being able to go to the garden shop and get stuff so that they can work in the yard, or home improvement materials so they can fix some things up around the house while they're home and have the time. And it seems like some of those things maybe are I don't know, over the top.
Well, think about, we have, we're living a different, government than many states or countries around the world. We, the people, are the government. And, and while we have a state of emergency right now, within that state of emergency are these executive orders. The legislature has no say in it. There's no oversight. Our role as a co-equal branch of government has been set aside. There are people out there. Most people in the state of Michigan are concerned with the virus itself, the crisis, the health part of it. They're worried for their lives and for their health and safety. And that is the number one priority for our task force, our work group, is precisely that: Michigan's health and its the lives of Michiganders. The second priority is the mental health and the livelihood of Michigan. It comes in second to their lives, is their livelihood. And then our third priority is Michigan's economic health and its viability. And so we're trying to find that balance. And what you found with that protest, I wasn't part of it. I appreciate the fact that we do live in a country where you have a right to assemble, that they feel a right that they feel was taken away. And so while there are people worried about the virus, there are many people. When we poll them, I think I saw at one poll 82% of all Americans feel like our economic crisis is just as bad as this health crisis that we're in, and then there are people that are worried about their democracy, their liberties, this republic. And so what you see is a lot of different concerns, a lot of different frustrations, a lot of people that are that just don't. They feel helpless, and they want to do something. And so this is all a part of why we're trying to get Michigan back to work again. When it comes to the nurseries, what we try to point out to people too is that, yeah, the nurseries are closed, and I think they should be open. I think they can work safely. I think that just like if you can open up a liquor store safely, I think you can open up a garden center safely. And so these are some of the disparities and in the hypocrisies. I can go to a pot shop, not that I would, but I could, and buy pot, but I can't go to a cigar shop and buy cigars. Some of this just doesn't make common sense to people. And what we also know is that there is a chain of a supply chain. So Myers already took delivery on plants and in spring materials to sell to the public, but they were forced to close their garden shop, and they sent the materials back to the wholesalers. Now the wholesalers are sitting on it, and there's no date certain to open up a garden center, for example. So when does Meyer reorder their stuff? It's going to take time to get there. When are they going to be able to reopen so that they can hire their employees back? And these are real questions that that have to be timed out, and there's no date certain. If the governor doesn't come out and say definitely on April 30th that garden shops can open back up again, but under these safe conditions, then we don't know when to start the logistics process of moving things around and hiring people. See, there's a whole economic ecosystem out there that is completely ignored with this.
Yeah, that's true. And interestingly, this is a very different kind of public emergency than we've seen in the past. Most people don't really say much if a governor of a state or if the president says stay off the streets, stay in your homes for a couple, 3 days after a big weather event or a bombing, for example, or some other public emergency. And most people don't say much about that. This was a little different because it was for an extended period of time, and then the governor just recently pushed the date out further from, April 13th to April 30th, I think.
Right.
And it seems like there were people talking about the idiosyncrasies and the disparities of what was closed and what wasn't, what was being considered by the governor and I suspect her advisors as to what were essential services. And people were poking fun at that a little bit, but it wasn't until after she, kicked it up a notch and moved it out further. And we're looking at a longer period of time, and as you pointed out, there's no date certain for when we peak and when we can consider starting to to restart. The president is already pushing for a restart. Some states are looking at restarting because they haven't been hit as hard. The group that you're working with, about how many people is it, Ken?
6. So we have, again, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. And so we meet right now every other day during the week with Zoom meetings. And yesterday we invited health professionals. We had 3 doctors and 2 public health officials that they were there to answer our questions about testing and safe protocols, for workspaces, and had a great conversation with them. So what they will take that information on tomorrow at 10 o'clock. We'll do another Zoom meeting, and we will talk to business associations, the Small Business Association of Michigan, the Michigan Manufacturers. We have an economic developer on. We have MIOSHA as the state director, and we will have the Sugar Law Group, which is employee labor group, and so we'll have some balance on that committee, talking about the realities of going back to work, and are employees comfortable, going into workplaces under certain conditions. And so at some point we're going to have to restart our economy. This state of emergency will not last forever. So are we going to be prepared for the day when this actually happens?
Are these members all members of the state Senate, or do you have some state House members as well?
No, this is a Senate work group. So it was me. It's me, Senator Vanderwall, who is my vice chair on the Economic Development Committee, and Wayne Schmidt is a Republican up from Traverse City, is on this. Jeremy Moss is on my Democrat on my Economic Development Committee. Stephanie Chang is the Democrat minority floor leader, and then I've got Sylvia Santana, who's senator from the Detroit area. And so we've got it bipartisan. We've got the hot spots covered. We've got the areas where the virus hadn't taken hold, and so just kind of a very diverse geographic demographic for the committee.
Ken, I have a break coming up here. Can you stick around and we'll talk some more?
Certainly.
Okay. Before the break, we were starting to talk about the makeup of this group of senators that you've been working with a committee called Safe Behaviors for Safe Workspaces. And during the last segment, I mentioned the president is calling for a return to work where possible, and that a lot of people, including the people protesting in Lansing yesterday, are thinking that maybe things are a little too strict in Michigan. But as even our own governor has been talking about, what happens going forward, how much of the work of this committee can serve as a model or a route, a path back to normalcy?
I think that's our ultimate goal, because the recommendations we make are still only recommendations to the governor. In how she is managing this state of emergency and the stay-at-home order, and we hope that some of our advice gets her to revise her emergency orders to open up nurseries and let certain work groups or sites that go back up and running again. And what we focused on is not necessarily the industry, because we had a lot of people talking about, the landscapers and lawn cutter guys. What we started looking at was activities. So if you think in our first phase of this, that we started looking at the activity of one worker at one work site that does not deal with the general public or doesn't have direct contact with a customer. And you think in terms of like the UPS driver, the FedEx driver can drop the package off your door, ring the doorbell, and then they leave. If somebody's cutting the lawn, they unload their machines and they mow your lawn, and they load the machines back up and leave, and you never have contact with them. Somebody's got to open up the pool. The sun's beating down on the winter cover and creating algae, black mold underneath. That's not healthy. So that person who never has contact, they just walk in the back fence and open up your pool and get it cleaned out. See, we know that there's certain protocol for that. But now you take that same single worker and a single work site, and you add the general public to it, or a customer. And now think of a hairstylist or a barber. They do have direct contact with the public, and so what the protocol is going to be different. But what is that protocol? And our health experts have talked about it. Working with gloves or masks in that close of a contact, and if you can do that safely. And I'm talking to the hairstylists. They have their own protocol, and barbers do. They naturally do, because they want to keep their customers healthy, regardless of this crisis. And so these are the things that we're beginning to look at, is the actual protocol of how to get back to work safely. Now, going back to that first bucket idea, of no contact with the public, and you add 8 or 10 people, and look at a construction crew, for example. Now, they're not dealing with the general public. They're not dealing with the customer directly, but they have proximity to themselves. So there has to be a protocol for that. And you think about a small parts plant, or square footage-wise, how many people can you put per square foot? So these are things that we're beginning to study, and we're just looking for best practices from around the country, from around the world. And then when you're talking about retail, now you're talking about contact with the public again. So are you putting up sneeze guards at your cash registers? Are you keeping a distance with them? Are you only allowing so many customers per square foot in your store? And so once we get this identified, start opening up the businesses. Once the state of emergency is done, these rules go away. Unless the legislature takes them up again in the form of bill.
When you talk about retail, for example, grocery stores, liquor stores, a few other kinds of businesses have been considered essential. And when I go to the grocery store, I'm always surprised that there are lots of cars in the parking lot, and they're not packed. It's not shoulder to shoulder, but there are quite a few people in the big stores, and I've seen the sneeze guards, the plastic plexiglass sheets hanging in front of the cashier's station.
Mm-hmm.
And it always strikes me as a little bit odd when the clerk then reaches under the guard to take my money.
Mm-hmm.
There's still contact there, and I'm not sure that we can completely isolate from interaction.
Truly, and the question is, if you're looking, if you look at the experience that Spain had, they reopened their economy, just went back to normal life, and had a horrific relapse into this. And so they're an extreme example on one side of what not to do. And then you look at the example of Sweden, who never hit the panic button. They isolated and quarantined their frail seniors, their people with underlying conditions, regulated the contact with this population, and their kids went back to school. The restaurants were open. They used good hygiene, washed their hands a lot. They did all the right things, and their experience turned out very good. So in Michigan, if we're in the middle somewhere, because we have a hot spot because we have the Detroit airport, one of the last ones to close, with an international population that came through, and so we have hot spots, and then we have underlying conditions, diabetes, obesity seems to be worldwide a common thread in the COVID cases. in the COVID deaths, and then you have a population that's stacked. They're very close together in proximity, and so you have the hot spot. And so we're trying to understand the geography of it, the nature of it, and at some point when we have the proper testing, including the antibody testing, to find out if you've already had it. Many of us were very sick in November and December. There was a gunk going around. We didn't have a fancy name for it. But what if we find out that indeed was, this COVID-19? And in California, they're finding that out, and they think that their exposure to the Asian coast because of the Pacific Ocean connection, that a third of their population may have already contracted it and gotten over it. We have, I think, some 98% survival rate, even if you get it. And so these are things that we're learning, but the basis for our group is simpler than that. It's more of a grassroots kind of blue collar. How do we get people back to work again? Because the government money is only going to last so long.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure that that there's enough government money to do the things that have already been promised. But what about? I want to talk about restaurants, because you used to be in the restaurant business. I also want to talk about schools and what happens with students, especially this class of 2020. But let's talk about restaurants. We know things are going to be a little different going forward. I think the elbow bump is here to stay, Ken.
Yeah.
But what are some things that do you think will be different about restaurants? Will we get back to crowded restaurants and revelry and all that?
I hope so. I think once we get any vaccine or any kind of antibodies, if we learn that this malaria drug, however you pronounce it, actually works. I think Representative Whitsett actually contracted the disease with in horrible shape, hydrochloroquine or whatever it's called.
Yeah, hydroxychloroquine.
Yes, and so that was prescribed to her, and within hours she was feeling better.
Wow.
And so she is a great survivor. She was at the White House talking about her experience, how rough it was for 3 weeks, and so we have a legislator that survived it. We have a legislator that did not survive it. Representative Robinson from the Detroit area.
Right.
And we have Tyrone Carter, representative, that's contracted it, and I think he's self-quarantined. But I think that he is making a recovery. And so we have all different kinds of experiences just in our own legislature. And the reason I'm going to bring that up is going back to the restaurants. I think to start out with, the tables will be spaced farther apart. They won't be as close together. A 100-seat restaurant may turn into a 50-seat restaurant for some period of time. And I think it's not so much by government order. It's going to be, to accommodate the comfort level of their customers. And the travel leisure industry will be the last industry to recover. And for the businesses that actually survive, I had a fire in my kitchen that closed down for 40 days back in 2002, and it wiped out my savings. It wiped out my equity. I rebuilt the kitchen and lived our lives on credit for years after that. It is shutting down a business on purpose, shutting down this many businesses on purpose. We are going to lose many. And there are some that are just going to shut their doors forever. And so there's going to be less restaurants, and they're going to be they're going to have less seats, the ones that do open. And we'll see how that goes. On the manufacturing side, there's going to be pent-up energy, and I hope that we learn that that in terms of manufacturing pharmaceuticals, manufacturing clothing, these PPEs are a good example. I think the president and vice president are funding the reopening of the old wardrobe district. What do they call it?
The garment district.
Garment district in New York, and for the purpose of making masks and gowns, and I hope that stays the way it is, and that all manufacturing is considered a national security issue, and that we should never be in this position again. And so manufacturers can put on a second shift, a third shift, and they can make up for pent-up energy. The restaurant and hospitality industry will never be able to make up the days, never be able to have enough seats and work enough shifts to make up for what they've lost.
And speaking of making up for what they've lost, what about public school students during the school closings? And it's not just here in Michigan, but all over the country. Is the class of 2020 going to get a pass on qualifying for graduation?
Yes, I think so. They're going to, they'll be given their degrees. And most, I think, all of them were pretty close, anyways. And at the end of your 12th year, you're pretty much taking blow-off classes, anyways, right? And so I think that I don't think the school districts have much other choice. When the governor closed, I prefer that she didn't. That she would give us at least a month to work inside schools, just to prevent loss of education especially for those that are going to be returning next year. And I talked to superintendents. We had a Zoom call just this past Monday, and what they're looking at, many districts are actually opening up a couple weeks early in August, and to perform remedial work and just to get kids back into the game again. And so there's going to have to be a hefty recovery. One of the things I'm worried about, Tom, though, is that our sales tax revenues are flat. 60% of all sales tax revenue, because of proposed lay back in the day, go into the school aid fund. Property taxes, businesses go under or just can't pay their property taxes. They're non-homestead. They're 18 mills. What happens to the school aid fund and revenue sharing for communities, cities, and townships who need to hire police and fire and run their DPWs? The revenue sharing is going to go flat again, just like it did during the recession and after our lost decade that you and I have talked about before. And so after the last recession, we had under Granholm, there was cuts of like $250 per pupil. Teachers didn't get raises after that under the Snyder administration for 4 or 5 years. And these are real aftermath effects of recessions. And you've already lost in April $71.5 million in our school aid fund, and May will be worse, they say.
And you're talking about institutions and organizations that are and were already cash strapped.
Yes. Yeah, because they've never made up. You ask the schools, we're spending records amount in our schools, but if you compare it to what we should be spending under a traditional rate of inflation, they've not made up for that. And honestly, we have a shortage of teachers, we have a shortage of firefighters and police officers, first responders, and we can't pay them enough to attract them into the business. And we've, it's another long story, but we frustrated the teachers right out of with all the testing and all the reporting requirements. And so we need to pay them better. We need to have better benefits, but we can't do it when school aid fund is ultimately a function of the economy, not of the legislature. We can't just print that money in Michigan. And so I hope we have the teachers and firefighters and police officers and township officials and city council people that are going to be supportive of our safe behaviors for safe workplaces work group. Because if we don't get sales tax revenues and we don't get income tax revenues, our budgets are toast. I got to figure out a report just today in Capital Press. As I've got to find as part of my committee some of that $2.6 billion that's going to have to be cut out of this year's budget alone.
Wow.
That's a lot of money.
I know that nobody really knows exactly what's going to happen because this is a new thing and we're still learning about it. But is there a formula that, once we reach a certain point and the curve has flattened, is there a point where we can start a stopwatch and say, okay, 14 days from this point, we can sort of declare an all clear, and which
no, we can't, and that's our great frustration. In Washington, we've bent the curve. We haven't flattened the curve, right? And so they're already talking about opening up nationally, opening up the economy. It's slowly phased in. So that the hot spots are still under control. And Michigan should be looking at the same thing, as phasing it in. We've bent the curve in Michigan. We've gone our fourth day in a row with less cases, but the number of deaths still lags that. So that's alarming to people, and it should be. And so what do you use? And the doctors that we had on our work group call yesterday all complained about not having enough testing equipment, and so how do you test? And we find out that the antibody is in many of us, and we could go back, but we don't have the test to prove it. So do we wait for the medical personnel to tell us that when it's time? And what about a second wave? I mean, are we going to react this way through a second wave? And then what happens when there's a new form, a new strain, and of a novel virus that we have no vaccine for? And so those are the medical questions, and those will always be hanging with us, I believe. But think about the SARS and Ebola and some of the things that we faced in the past are behind us. The AIDS epidemic, some of those are still with us. We have to be very, very careful, not to let them explode again. But we'll get over this. It's going to be a matter of time. But in the meantime, our economy, people's livelihoods, their life savings are at risk. And so what we're trying to do is find that balance and make workplaces safe under today's conditions, and get people back to work. And mental health is another big issue that we talk about a lot.
One last quick thing about restaurants, and you're more familiar with restaurants than most people. Can a large number of the restaurants can they survive, or at least stave off closure by running takeout operations?
No. Unless you're already a fast food place that has a robust takeout window and program. There are some that are getting by, but honestly, I've seen there are so many restaurants. My restaurant could not open. It depended on local business. Probably half of a percent was takeout at the time.
Yeah.
But I couldn't open up a kitchen and hire people. And have that take me through a month, 2 months, in an uncertain period of time. And so you close your doors, and then do you have the cash? Do you have the liquidity, to order your food again? To order, if the beer driver comes, you got to pay cash for that. If the liquor arrives, you got to pay cash for that. The Gorgeous Food Service truck shows up. If you don't have a credit arrangement with them, you pay cash for that, and then you got to get everything kicked off. It's almost as if you're starting a brand new business again, and your customer base is going to be uncertain. they're not gonna have a comfort level. They're not gonna visit you as frequently, and and they're not going to stick around as long. They're not going to want to be in big crowds right away. And so this is a real tentative position for most restaurant owners right now.
Well, Ken, it's always a pleasure talking with you, and thanks so much for spending this time with me this morning. I appreciate it.
No, thank you so much, and thanks for your show. And we're sitting sometimes here alone, but we're never alone.